Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the SmartWealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Hello, everybody. I'm Thane Stenner of Stenner Wealth Partners of CG Wealth Management, and I'm the lucky host of the BNN Bloomberg SmartWealth monthly podcast, where I get to interview some interesting professionals and entrepreneurs on various subjects each month. And I'm very pleased to say that the podcast is just beginning to kind of grow by leaps and bounds. So very excited to be with you here today. I have a very special guest here today. Her name is Cindy Radu. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this since we first talked about it. So
yeah, excellent. Well, so am I. And you're based in
Calgary.
Okay, just wanted to put that on the board there for those Albertans. And I think I'll get you shortly to kind of talk about your background personally and professionally. But obviously, as a professional, you have clients across Canada. And do you actually go into the US as well? Just curious.
I haven't yet, other than we'll talk about Tamarind, sort of that cross-border experience, but I'd be more than happy to work with families in the US for sure.
Okay, great. Well, listen, let me set the table for our audience here. This is an interesting topic. It's basically family governance. Mm-hmm. So before you kind of click off and say governance, oh, this sounds kind of boring. It's actually really interesting work. And, I've personally read a lot of professional books around this topic, and it's a really important topic that Cindy will kind of share with us more about. But, there's a phrase in the wealth management industry and the family enterprise industry that talks about shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. So basically it kind of references how it's challenging and difficult to kind of maintain and still grow and engage with, the first 3 generations, particularly of wealth creation. So I'm very pleased to have Cindy here today. She's an expert on the topic. And with that in mind, do you mind, Cindy, just giving a little bit about your personal and professional background so we can begin?
Sure. Well, this could take the whole podcast, so I'll try to keep it to the key points. But I've had a very interesting and rewarding career. I started out actually as a chartered accountant and decided that wasn't going to be what I wanted to do professionally, and ended up as the controller at Bennett Jones, which is a fantastic law firm in Canada. And at the age of 23, I had a staff of 17 people and running the accounting department for one of the best, in my opinion, law firms in Canada, which was incredible. And at the age of 28-ish, I was like, okay, what am I going to do for the rest of my career? And I had just kind of fallen in love with law and lawyers, being in that environment, and decided to go back to law school with the thought that I'd end up back there, which ultimately I did. But when I got into law school, I was focused on tax and trusts and became the co-author on the university textbook on taxation and estate planning in Canada, and found kind of this sort of academic education. I'm an education junkie, as you'll find as we go through this a bit, but I ended out in Vancouver after law to do my master's in law, and I clerked at the BC Court of Appeal and got called to the bar in your hometown, and then eventually came back to Calgary because it's more affordable here.
Gotcha.
And practiced as a tax lawyer, and kind of had this before, what I call my BC before child career. And when after Lucy, my daughter, was born, I didn't go back into that 6-minute billable hour environment. I worked with one of the big financial institutions as a resource to their private banking team and to their really high net worth clients. And I loved that kind of interaction. And then I had an opportunity to start for another financial institution, their Western Canadian multifamily office branch. So I did that as well. And so really had been working in this family office space. I also started and ran a trust company for another group of advisors. And that was fantastic as well. But it's always kind of been this weaving around high net worth, wealth, family transition, trusts, and governance that we'll get to talk about. And yeah, so I love learning. I've done my designations are at some point have all been FCA, which is a fellow chartered accountant, LLB, LLM, trust and estate practitioner. I have been very involved with STEP globally. Most recently, I had co-chaired the Global Business Family Special Interest Group. And in 2018-19, I was chosen by my global peers of over 20,000 peers as Trusted Advisor of the Year, which was a great accomplishment.
Fantastic.
And I find out next week if I'm in a finalist category for Family Business Advisor of the Year with some really great other finalists. So STEP has been fantastic. I have my ICD.D, which is governance focused. I did my CFP. I don't know. There's other FEA. I've done my FEA designation. So a joy of lifelong learning, and I bring that to my clients.
Gotcha. So I'm going to ask you some softer questions, but just to kind of bring to the surface some things about you. So why do you do what you do?
My gosh.
And you don't have to call me Oprah or anything, but I mean, why do you enjoy this work so much?
I'm going to say two main things. So one is obviously my own love of learning, but I have seen so many families, I don't want to say destroyed, I don't want to like dramatize stuff, but really have a hard time understanding the structures, and how I frame it is the structures that have been done to them. And I feel a tremendous amount of responsibility for that, because I used to do that. I used to be one of those lawyers who would do a structure, put a structure in place, talk to, typically dad, maybe mom and dad, and give them like this massive planning memo that there's no possible way they've read, or even if they did, that they would understand. And over time, I just came to appreciate that, like, this isn't helping anybody. We're not, we're doing really, really good technical work, but as we're moving into this massive wealth transition stage that we're in, we're starting to see the chips in the armor. And so we need to do better, and we can do better. And so part of the reason actually that I've dropped most of my designations is because I want to be that really independent voice for the clients, and have like a really collaborative relationship with the advisor team, where I'm not doing what they do anymore. I am really just kind of part of this integrated wealth advisor team.
Excellent.
And bring these years of legal, accounting, trust, financial institution, family office background lens to that team as an objective person. So that's really, it's not like I could have planned this. It wasn't a career trajectory, but I've really just found my happy place, and the clients I get to work with just bring me so much joy. And it's really fun. It's great work.
Fantastic. So you're kind of like a Sherpa or navigator. In many ways. That's good. So before we go into, because one of the things I had asked of you is that we could go through 2 or 3 examples of, fact patterns and stories. I think one is public, and then some others you've changed the names to protect the innocent or not so innocent. But I think, tell us a little bit about Tamarind Learning Canada, and obviously where it was founded in the US as well, just to maybe put that on the table.
Yeah, thanks for asking about that. So for me, education obviously is really important. And, when we talk about governance, which we'll be getting into, the definition that I really have kind of gravitated to when it comes to governance is one that's been put forward by Matt Fulbrook. And I'm just going to read it because I want to make sure I get it right. And it's intentionally cultivating, effective conditions for making decisions. So if you think about governance, that's what it is. It's about making good decisions. Good governance is about making good decisions. So what are the conditions that you need to have to make good decisions? And there will be many, many, many conditions. But for me, one of them is you need to understand what you're making decisions about, right?
Yes.
So that ties in really nicely for me to this idea of education. So what happened was I have, families who are obviously really interested in education. And a couple of years, probably 3 years ago now, on my LinkedIn popped up this, we're doing a soft launch of Tamarind Learning. And I hadn't heard about Tamarind Learning. I knew of Kirby Rossblock. Anybody who kind of works in the family office space and high net worth individuals will have heard of Kirby. And so I listened to this podcast or went on this webinar and saw this introductory demo. And I'm like, wow, this is really something else. And so I thought, okay, well, I'll get a demo with this client, and it's fantastic. And the client thought it was fantastic, but the reality was it was developed in the US. And so it had a lot of US content that just wasn't going to translate easily into Canada. And so I said to the client, realistically, this isn't probably going to be a great fit because I'm going to have to translate so much with you. And we had that call with Kirby. And in the kind of course of those conversations, Kirby learned the background that I've just shared with you. And she invited me to Canadianize the content. And I'm like, what an amazing opportunity. Again, right up my alley. I love writing. I love the education. I love not having to be technical anymore. I used to do a lot of writing and speaking, CAs to CAs, lawyers to lawyers, that kind of thing. But it's a way different approach when you're working with families. And anyway, so that's how I got introduced to Tamarind. Kirby and I worked together with her team to create the Canadian platform. So we do now have Tamarind Learning Canada. And again, just really delighted that Kirby invited me to be the Chief Learning Officer for Tamarind Canada. So
Fantastic.
it's really fun for me to have that opportunity.
Oh, thanks for sharing. So let's transition now into some examples, right? I think stories or examples or illustrations tend to, I find, really bring home the concept. So as far as governance goes and wealth education, a lot of studies out there, and I think you maybe want to reference one study. So I'll leave that right now to you to do.
Yeah. There's a RBC, many institutions do some great studies, but RBC had done a interesting study in about 2017. And if we think about, let's just say Canada's about roughly 10% of, the US. So in the US, they're expecting 84 trillion to transition by 2045 and 16 trillion in the next 10 years. So let's just say we've got about $1.5 trillion of wealth in play over the next 10 years. So this RBC report, they look at sort of the wealth transition that's in place and how we're preparing the rising generation. And they're saying education, if it's happening at all, based on their survey, is that it's happening late. And only 35% of parents are actually intending to educate their children. And 35% of them were prepared to receive wealth. So we kind of have, it's probably that 35% who themselves were prepared that are like, yeah, this is great. We need to prepare. We need to prepare the next gen. But the survey also went on to identify that when those discussions were taking place, they're highly superficial. And it's really just primarily telling people how much money is there, but very little to actually prepare them for that wealth. Or, if there is education, it's really informal, it's unstructured. So, really, there's, I think they said something like 40-ish% of parents actually want to start helping their kids, but they haven't done anything. So we're kind of putting this off. We recognize that, we need to do this, but it's a little bit of a head in the sand.
So why do you think that is? Like, why do you think people aren't having those family discussions so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, interesting that you asked that, because I know we just introduced this report, but it actually talked about those barriers, and I'll just give you these statistics. So they said 31% said that they felt unprepared. So we'll just call that generation one. We'll
Yep.
call it, so
Yep.
they feel that they're not prepared to do this. Another 27% feel like the rising generation isn't old enough, which is really interesting, because you can start with kids well below age of 18 on this stuff.
Yes.
15% said they don't feel that the rising generation is ready. And we had 13% not comfortable about talking about their death. So we've got that persona of people that I'm not comfortable talking about this. For me, I think that from a family perspective, it's intimidating. Like, you don't know where to start or how to start, and they want education that's interesting and practical and applicable to where they're at, but it also needs to be efficient, right? Everybody's busy and they're spread out all over the world.
Correct.
And so traditional education models that, we would have grown up with and we're familiar with just aren't working. Like, they're not flexible. You can't be bum in the seat. Often they're boring. They're not directly relevant. I mean, family members, they don't know what they don't know. Advisors, we don't know what we don't know. So you start kind of going to conferences, and some of it might be relevant, but then you're back home and you're busy and you're not really applying it. And then it's really hard to curate topics on your own, right? Again, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know who's best in field, what's current, if stuff's out of date. So it is a real challenge for families to embark on this journey. Thus the role of, chief learning officer that's evolving, and more interest in this space and tools like Tamarind Learning for people to get going.
So again, we'll get into some examples here shortly, but so the Tamarind Learning platform is kind of a digitized or an online portal. And clients, I think, pay kind of a subscription to it, and it's a learning curriculum that they can kind of go through at their own pace. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, but it basically combines the personal navigator, Sherpa, named Cindy here in Canada. Is that fair? Is it's combination, some in person, or is it mostly virtual?
Yeah, again, a really great question. You are getting better at this, Thane.
Thank you.
So we kind of talk about three different advisor archetypes. So there's what I'll just call like the type that just wants to hand off. They recognize this is really important, but they don't really want to be involved in this isn't their primary, their primary way of earning a living. This isn't what they want to do for a career, but they recognize that this learning is really important. So they want to find that tool and really hand it off. They'll stay in touch peripherally. The next one is, somebody that's, kind of wants to stay in touch, but wants to have maybe somebody else like me run that, lead that, develop the education plans, make sure that the cohorts are running smoothly if there's a cohort of people, really hands-on. They don't want that really hands-on role, but they want to stay involved. And then there's other people like me in my advisor role, because I am an advisor role separate from what I do as Tamarind, I'd roll up my sleeves and I'd get right in there, right? And so there's those different personas from the advisor perspective. From the family perspective, we also have to be really aware of that, because people have very different learning styles. Right? And they have different times of day that they like to work. Some people like to study in the middle of the night. Some people are like, no, I got to do it first thing in the morning. Some like really structured learning. Some like, I'm just going to do plow through this weekend because it's raining out and my plans change. So I'm going to take this time. So, asynchronous is the term that we use with Tamarind. You can do it at your own time, but there's an overall goal,
Gotcha.
get this done by the end of next month, but I don't care if you do it all next weekend or you spread it out and do a little bit every day. So that asynchronous learning opportunity with cohorts, if there's more than one individual learning in that same cohort, so that we have times together to share our learnings and have conversations and apply it to your specific circumstances. So a lot of flexibility, and the content itself, which we can talk about later perhaps, covers all the bases.
Excellent. Yeah. So I actually have a client based in Calgary, clients across Canada that we deal with, about 47 of them, which, family offices and whatnot. But I've actually got this family group. I was just thinking as you were talking that I think could actually really use you and your expertise. We're just going to take a quick break, so please stay with us and we'll be right back with Cindy Radu. Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the SmartWealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Welcome back, everybody. I'm with Cindy Radu, and we're having a great conversation, so let's get back started. Let's jump in to give us an example of, or a story that you can kind of share around a situation. And let's start off with a good situation, like family fully engages. And then, of course, you got to have some fun stuff, well, maybe not so fun, some challenging stuff on the second story. And we'll, possibly finish there. So over
go from
to you.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of my favorite recent ones actually is, I'm going to call this the totally proactive, like out of nowhere. And of course, I love these scenarios where I get called to say, we need help. Like, it's the family identifying this. And in this particular situation, it was the dad, and he was in one of these peer group cohorts. And he's like, they're doing this thing that many people will be familiar about, called estate freeze. They were doing their first estate freeze. And the dad was like, my accountant is saying this and my lawyer is saying this. They're both really smart, really capable people. I have no idea what they're saying. And they seem to be saying different things to me, and I can't filter it.
Yeah, different languages, speaking different languages.
Very, very much so. And so that was the ask. It was like, can you just help me basically be an interpreter for what's going on here? And, what kind of questions I should ask. And so that's how we started. And I spent some time with him, and he said, oh, could you come talk with me and my wife and go through this? Because she'd really find this helpful. And then we kind of fast forward a few months. So after, they understood basically what it was that they were trying to do, then the documents started coming. And they got, great big trust deed document that was maybe 40 pages long. I don't know, they can be shorter, they can be longer.
Yep.
And the ask was, can you tell us who your beneficiaries, settlor, and trustee are? So I get the call, and he's like, I don't even know what this means. How am I supposed to pick these people? I don't know what skills they should have, what their characteristics should be. And I'm like, again, great question. So we went through that, and we spent time again, one-on-one at their place, going through, well, what does this mean? What is this like? Well, really oddly, a settlor doesn't really have anything to do with the trust. It's kind of a one-time transaction almost, versus, who are the beneficiaries and who are the trustees. Those are really super critical things to understand. And what's the difference between like a trustee and a guardian? Those were questions that came up. So having that real one-on-one time, real time with the in this case, the parents, the kids are still quite young, but the transaction has now closed just as of last week. Well, they haven't signed the documents yet because he got the 400-page closing book, and he's like, I need you to go through this with me before we sign off.
So basically that was a business sale they were going through.
An estate freeze, which...
Oh, sorry, my apologies.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yes. Yeah. So, not selling a business, but just this idea of, freezing the value right now and then transferring ownership of some of the shares into a family trust.
Yes.
So that's why, understanding all this is, now we had an operating company, but now we have a holding company, and we have a trust, and we have the operating company, and how do all these bits and pieces fit together?
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about governance, really interesting, right? Because where are decisions being made? Who are the owners? Who are the directors? Who's the CEO? These different roles need to be really clarified in terms of understanding where and how you're making decisions, and that, what hat are you wearing, right?
Yeah, excellent. So you walked them through this 400-page document.
Oh, that's next week.
Oh, okay, sorry. So the 40 page, let's start with the 40-page one then.
Yeah.
So you walked them through. So what was he relieved after? Like, did he?
Yeah. Yeah. Because then they understand, and it's like, oh, okay. So for this person, would I pick, my brother-in-law, or would I pick it? Yeah, that would be a good person for this. But these are the characteristics you want for the trustees. So trustees right now will be mom and dad. So they're like, okay, we need some education. So there'll be ongoing education about what is their role as trustees and what do they need to do, and and then identifying the beneficiaries, and again, how does that all tie in to their wills and some of their other structures and their insurance? So there's lots of, it's not a one and done. It's like peeling back layers of the onion, right? So we start with the big picture, and then something's going to happen. There'll be and I'll say, okay, well, remember when we talked about, so this is this now in action, right? So now you're declaring a dividend from your company, right? Or from your holding company up to your trust.
Yep.
So now what are we going to do with that?
Yeah, exactly.
Where's that money going to go? Do we want to keep that in the trust and invest it there and use that as a family bank? And what would that look like? And what would we use that money for?
Yep.
And how do we make decisions about that? Right. So it's not just the decision about, okay, we're making a dividend and we're going to pay it out. There's so much fun stuff you can do with that money.
Yeah.
And
so it's more than just the mechanical or legal or accounting steps. It's actually what is the strategy around those items? So
what are the opportunities? Really, what are the opportunities, right? So again, governance, we're making good decisions. There's a lot of wealth tied up in these structures, right? And if you don't understand them, that's not good, right? It's really not good. And you're going to start ending up with the rising gen asking questions, and not to sort of throw dads under the bus, but typically dads will kind of say, well, they'll try to answer the question. They'll say, well, this is how it works. But they're filtering that through their lens, and it might not actually be how it works.
Gotcha.
And so you like having that independent person to say, this is how it would work. Here's an example. This is how I've seen other families do this. This is where, like we're talking about today, right? This is where I've seen things maybe not go so well. But this is how we got it back on track. And that's really hard for families to do by themselves, because they're like an isolated system to themselves. And, golf course planning doesn't really work well.
Well said. So let's just extrapolate out, or take this scenario out. So estate freeze next week. That's clearly 400 pages. There's going to be extra complexity with that. So, you're taking, let's just call it, you're taking G1 or dad and mom through this process. And then, so what would be the game plan you would try to develop with them, with Tamarind as a learning platform, and you as a strategic advisor over the next 12 months? Like, where would you ideally like to go with that family?
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to assume this family is a little bit older and a little bit further on down the path, and their kids are older, because their kids are still quite young. So the education that we're looking at there is more targeted to younger kids. And Robin Taub has got a great book called The Wisest Investment, for example, that is a good source for that, and Raising Financially Fit Kids by Jolene Godfrey. So there's other tools that we look at for the younger generations.
Yes.
But if this was, further along, it's like, okay, how do we communicate this now to, and ideally, I was going to say, how do we communicate this now to the rising generation? Ideally, which rarely if ever happens, we're having these discussions before the structure is put in place, right? We're actually having a conversation with the rising generation saying, this is what we're thinking about doing. We'll have advisors in the room going through these structures and what the technical outcomes could be. And then somebody like me who's saying, okay, and these are some of the opportunities or some of the considerations before we get the structure in place. Now with the structures in place, it's like, okay, what are we going to do with this? So, family governance, what are we putting some structure around that? Talking about family charters is a term that you'll often hear, or family constitution. If we're going to be using some of is there going to be shared wealth? How are we going to proactively use that shared wealth to prepare the rising generation to, for their distributions or to inherit this? So we need to get a plan in place to prepare them, because what is this estate freeze anyway? And what does it mean to be a good steward of wealth? And what is my responsibility as a beneficiary? And what did trustees do anyway? And gosh, I should probably have some financial literacy. How do I do that? How do I understand what is a financial planner? What are all the different advisors in this crazy world of wealth? And what are their roles and how do they work together? So it's really, there's a lot of content to cover, but what is of interest to them and why, we talk about it, Tamarind, what's in it for me, the with him. Like what is, you have to be motivated to really make this a win. Gotcha. So spending that time with individuals saying, what is it that's going to motivate you to learn? And, what are some of your fears about wealth, or what do you see as some of the opportunities? And then from there, building out a plan, understanding how much time they have to commit, how they like to learn. Does the family want to work as a cohort? Do they want to work as a blended cohort, maybe with another family, or, other peers? And so tailoring that plan so that it's going to work for the family, and then putting some markers in place so that we have goals that we're working toward.
Milestones.
Yeah. And capstones, right? To say, absolutely. Great, we've done this. And then, let's say you're doing something on trust, the education piece on trust, you're learning about trusts and how they're set up and what's, who's a settlor and a beneficiary and a trustee generically. Then we can go, okay, here's your trust. So you guys walk through it independently and you see if you can identify who these different parties are. And then we're going to have a call or a meeting or whatever, and we're going to go through this together. What came up for you? What did you find confusing? And it becomes an actual live learning process, not something that's in a bubble.
Yeah. And very practical, right? From point of view. Yeah. So it probably is a combination of video, online, and also in person, because, families have people all over the place, right? So in this day and age, I guess with COVID, we're all, a lot more used to doing video. I probably do like 8 to 10, Zoom calls a day. So it's people all over the world. I interviewed or chatted with a client the other day in Israel, another one in Montreal, and it's actually just, it's kind of weird because I didn't think I would adapt to the technologies as easily as I have. But, the last 3 years, I don't know how many video calls I've been in, but I find you can just, it's really easy, right? It's really easy to kind of, now, is it the same as being exactly in the room in person? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no. I mean, it's not one or the other. I think it's a both and.
Yeah.
There are opportunities when you build out learning plans with families to say, okay, we're going to have a capstone event, right? In person, and we're gearing up for that. And
I like that.
yeah, before that Capstone event, and you're going to say, well, Thane's going to be there, and we're going to go through investments. We've just gone through all the investment modules, all the investment lessons, and you've learned, that there's different types of investments. You've learned about, rates of return. You've learned about the taxation of these types of instruments. So now we're going to have a Capstone event in person. Thane's going to go through this in context of your specific portfolio.
Very good. We're just going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with Cindy Radu. So stay with us. Want to know how Canada's top entrepreneurs think about creating significant wealth? Join me, Thane Stenner, founder of Stenner Wealth Partners at CG Wealth Management and host of the SmartWealth podcast. Download today at iHeartRadio or your favorite podcast platform. Subscribe now. Welcome back, everybody. I'm with Cindy Radu. Let's get back to the conversation. Let's transition to a challenging scenario, one that you've maybe observed. I don't want to put you on the spot and say participated in, but just to emphasize what can go wrong and why it's so important for families today to kind of maybe step it up a bit from a point of view of, because at the end of the day, people do things, I think, for two main driving reasons: fear, greed, or pain or pleasure. Right? So, families, I think, generally speaking, want to avoid the pain of going through scenarios that involves money. That old, not truism, but that old phrase of, money is evil, or there's a whole bunch of different negative connotations to it or challenges to it. So just maybe share with the audience kind of a scenario that you've observed.
So I'm going to share a public domain scenario, which is actually a case that came out of British Columbia, and the family name is Prani, which is, again, it's in the public domain. And again, it's one of these estate freeze scenarios. And I wasn't involved in this, so I'm just going from what I've read from the court documents that I've seen. But the understanding is that there were, I think it was 4 brothers, and they're all involved in the same family business. And they did one of these estate freeze transactions. And when you have multiple siblings like that, how they decided to do it was create 4 different trusts for each, what I'll call it, each family branch. And they tend to get kind of cross-pollinated, right? But in the end of the day, you end up with, somebody who in each trust is a trustee, they're a beneficiary, they're a director of the companies, they're shareholders themselves directly, and then some of these roles were crossing. But
so lots of different hats, right?
Lots of different hats. What happens in Canada, without getting really technical, but trusts have, people think of it as a lifespan of 21 years. It's not that. It's what we call a deemed disposition every 21 years for tax purposes. So we pretend the trust disposes of the assets. If you have shares of a private company that's grown dramatically in value, you need to take steps to avoid prematurely paying tax. If you have like an investment portfolio in the trust, it may or often isn't a big deal, right? But in this case, we've got private company shares that had grown significantly in value. And so in a nutshell, the very standard procedure is you what's called roll out those assets to a capital beneficiary. You don't need to know the details. Basically, what it means is it happens on a tax-free basis. You reset and you start this all over again.
Got it.
And what typically that means is dad, who's a trustee, who's also a beneficiary, would get those assets and then would do the transaction again to reset the clock. When in this scenario, when the 21-year rule hit, some of the cousins were like, you're in a conflicting role here. You can't roll that out to yourself. I'm a beneficiary and I want some of this. And unfortunately, it went to litigation and went to the BC Supreme Court. And it eventually worked its way all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada. So there's some really interesting developments going on in the law here. There's nothing wrong with the way the transaction was done. Like everything is done appropriately. But for me, for kind of moving back to this education lens and this governance lens, there were unlikely to have been proactive conversations with those families to understand the purpose, like what was the purpose of the trust? Why are we putting these structures in place? What is the long-term plan here? How are you, what's your role as a beneficiary? Why does it make sense for us to do this? But instead you have, I mean, I don't like it when people tell me this has been done and this is the consequence for you when I didn't have a choice. Right? Or at least a conversation about it so that I could prepare myself for what the outcome would be. So, it's maybe not surprising that people kind of get their shorts in a bit of a knot on that kind of thing.
So
right?
in that type of scenario, I mean, I'm trying to actively listen to what you just said there. And you said, okay, the ideal scenario is being consulted, as a beneficiary or a trustee in advance. But a lot of times these things they've been set up for a long time. So you're kind of jumping into the deep end with these families.
Right.
And so I just want to make sure people that are listening to this don't think, well, I didn't get Cindy's help at the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
And so like the reality is there's no perfect time to start this process.
No. And in fact, I'm really glad you mentioned that because I do have a like an actual client family that was the scenario. And so it was not that dissimilar in that there were multiple branches and trusts had been set up. And there was kind of a map, I'll call it a map. I keep doing a triangle because that's what we draw them as lawyers and accountants. But there was a master trust, and then there are all these other trusts. But the communication hadn't been really good, and the generation that had set the trust up had long passed away, and one of the branches was going a bit rogue, and it was like, we need to nip this in the bud. Like, we don't want our family, we're now in generation, I think they're in generation 4 or 5. We don't want our family to be
dragged through the mud.
Yeah, well, not even dragged through the mud. We don't want our family destroyed. Like, we love our family. Like, we're good and we have great times together, and we want that to continue. And we don't want the cousins and the nieces and nephews to bear feelings that are tainted by the sins of the father kind of thing, right?
Yep.
And so we had an opportunity to go, okay, like, let's just take a pause and let's actually understand how these structures are set up, because there were a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings.
Sure.
And once you clear those up, you've kind of cleared the air, you can let the dust settle. And it's like, okay, what do we want to do now? Fair enough. If somebody says, you know what, this has been great, I understand it, but we still want to exit. Okay. Right? That's fair, but let's exit. That doesn't mean that you're not part of the family, that we can't continue to, it has to be no harm, no foul, right? I mean, I shouldn't have. Ideally, it's no harm, no foul.
Correct.
At some point, you have to kind of go, somebody needs to take the reins and make the bold move and say, yeah, let's just deal with this head on, because not talking about it isn't going to make it any better.
Yeah.
So education, being proactive on education, allows you to start cracking the nuts on these conversations, but you can do it in a really safe space. So you're learning on neutral case studies that don't have the emotional overlay, right? And then you can start to build into, okay, well, how does this apply? But that's, really important concept in Tamarind is this idea of safety and learning, right? That you're not having to butt up against sensitive topics in that learning process.
Yeah, and also not trying to operate on yourself.
Yeah.
In many ways. So this is fascinating work, Cindy. I can see why you're so passionate about it, and I've heard through many sources you're exceptionally good at it and gifted at it. So well done. So I guess just to wrap this up, what 2 or 3 points would you just like to leave people with from our time today? Takeaways.
Takeaways. Well, I'm going to say doing nothing, like the ostrich in the sand thing, is not a great way to prepare a family. We've kind of seen that in Granny, and like starting too late is also problematic. So don't be afraid to start and look at what the options are. There's lots of great tools online, and Thane, I'm happy to share with your audience if you want. I can send you some links for like some simple wealth assessment tools that you can, people can look at and kind of get a, oh, okay, well, yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Or yeah, education doesn't have to be boring. That's that's a real other thing. And I think from the positive perspective, I hope we could all agree that it's better to have an empowered, educated beneficiary of wealth
100%.
than somebody who's not prepared.
100%.
And so,
and I guess I would also maybe add to that, this isn't about perfection. I think people kind of maybe don't start because they say, well, I feel like I'm behind. I don't know what I don't know. But at the end of the day, you got to start somewhere. And if you really, from what I see with the types of families we deal with, if you really care about your family's happiness over time, trying to remove or educate, but then remove potential stumbling blocks that could come their way. The ongoing education piece is very powerful. It's extremely powerful. So I guess I do have a last question and a half for you. So what is typically the time commitment? You alluded to this earlier. People don't do it because they're busy, which is very true from what I've observed. But you take them on this journey of a year or 2 years, for an example.
Yeah.
Are we talking a couple hours a month kind of thing as a family, maybe online or in person? Like what sort of range of time?
Well, so it's almost a bit backing into what the family can do. So that development of the learning plan is got to be collaboratively designed.
Yeah.
If like let's say an individual who's kind of heads down and really just wants to go. Tori Holly, who's our works with Tamarind, she estimates that it's about 100 hours to get through all the content. We've got so much content in there, like there's movies and PDFs of books, and for people who are interested in a particular topic, there's lots of great deep dive material, but you might just want to know the basics and not do that extra stuff. So if you're just kind of doing all that basic, about 100 hours. So how you spread that out, that's up to you. Like I developed the content, but I've also done the course, and it's so much fun for me to see it, because I created Word documents basically, and I describe it as being a Disney animator where you're in behind the scenes doing something and then you see it on the big screen and it's like, wow. But all those extra tools, and there's loads of podcasts and articles and really great resources. So I think at the extreme end, 200 hours or maybe even more, but not everybody's going to want to be a 200-hour learner, right? And there'll be some leaders in the family who'll go, yeah, I really want to dig into this stuff, but not everybody, which is fine.
Well, listen, Cindy, it's been a pleasure having you and hosting you, and I'm absolutely sure that our listeners are going to be intrigued by this topic and hopefully elevate it in their thinking more and more. And as far as if folks ever wanted to reach out to you, would they just Google Tamarind Learning Canada to get to you, or how would they reach out to you?
Yeah, Cindy Radu, so www.cindyradu.com, and my email address is cindyradu@icloud.com.
Sounds good. Excellent. Well, listen, thank you very much once again for taking the time out of your busy schedule. It's clear to me, and I'm quite sure it's clear to the audience, that you're very passionate about this work. So keep up the great efforts, and I think I do have a client for you. So
Okay, thank you.
we'll talk soon. Have a great day. All right,
Thanks.
for now. Thanks everybody for tuning in for this month's BNN Bloomberg Smart Wealth podcast. My guest was Cindy Radu. Please feel free to check out our website at stennerwealthpartners.com. Yeah, welcome to ask us any questions and take a look at other content there as well. But join us next month. Really looking forward to seeing you.
The comments and opinions expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. and should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF. The comments expressed in this podcast are the results of work done by Stenner Wealth Partners. They may differ from the opinion of Canaccord Genuity Corp. and should not be considered as representative of Canaccord's beliefs, opinions, or recommendations. All views expressed in this podcast are provided for informational purposes only and do not constitute an offer or solicitation to buy or sell any securities. The statements expressed herein are not intended to provide tax, legal, or financial advice, and under no circumstances should be construed as a solicitation to act as a securities broker or dealer in any jurisdiction. All views are intended for general circulation only and do not have any regard to the specific investment objectives, financial situation, or general needs of any particular person, organization, or institution. Canaccord is a member of the CIPF.